Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Cathy Gillespie,
with students
Dakare, Chatman,
and me, Tova Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America.
Welcome to Constitutional Chats with Janine Turner. That's me, Cathy Gillespie, Tova Kaplan, and Dakare Chatman, who's not with us today, but Dakare Chatman is also a co-host. Once again, my name is Janine Turner. I'm an actress by trade. You can visit my website, JanineTurner.com, to find out all about that and all the other things I do. But one of the most important things in my life is this foundation, Constituting America, which I founded and co-president with Cathy Gillespie. And we launched this foundation in 2010. And we are nonpartisan with a goal to educate everyone in a nonpartisan way about the relevancy of our United States Constitution and our founding documents. So enough about me, as we say in Hollywood. What do you think about me? Ah, that's a joke. So I want to introduce Cathy Gillespie. Cathy Gillespie is co-president. And Cathy was a CEO on the Hill forever, a chief of staff on the Hill. And now she's one of the prestigious, she has been picked for a very prestigious panel. It's quite the honor. One of 16, only 16 people are serving on the Semi-Quincentennial Commission. And they are planning the 250th anniversary of our country's birth with the Declaration of Independence. So Cathy, say hello.
Hi, everyone, and we're really excited that our two guests are also on the Semi-Quincentennial Commission, and Janine will be introducing them as well. But Professor Morel and Val Crofts are both on the Semi-Quincentennial Commission as well.
Yeah, so they're one of the prestigious 16. We're lucky today. We have very, very prestigious people. Okay, Tova Kaplan. Tova Kaplan, the extraordinary Tova, is 16 years old. You're not going to believe it when you get to hear her speak today and listen to her intellect at work. She lives in Chicago, Illinois. She currently serves as Constituting America's National Youth Director, and she runs the National Youth Advisory Council like a CEO. I always brag on her. She's just amazing. She's a 3-time winner of Constituting America's We the Future contest. Please check that out at constitutingamerica.org. Great opportunity for your students and children this summer. She's a 3-time winner. She won for entrepreneurial in the entrepreneurial category. And when she was in middle school, she created a marketing plan for Constituting America. Then she won for public service announcement, which is a commercial. She wrote, produced, starred, edited, did the whole thing. Wonderful public service announcement. Know your rights, read the Constitution. And this year she won Right Brain, Left Brain. She won for STEM, where she created an app for Constituting America. And I can't wait to get that working. Now that she's finished school, we're gonna get that app up. She is passionate about educating and empowering young people to use their constitutional rights, and she's truly a delight and very, very brilliant. Hello, Tova Kaplan. Say hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I can't wait to delve into this super interesting topic.
It is a super interesting topic. Thank you, Tova. Dakare Chatman's not with us today. Dakare Chatman just booked a movie with Spike Lee, so that's like super cool. He is also, well, he's 17 now, but he is doing something for the movie, so he can't be with us today, but he is just a super terrific, wonderful, equally as brilliant young man. And he's won our contest twice, one for public service announcement and one the other time for a short film. All of these works are available at constitutingamerica.org. Okay, our constitutional experts for the day. Are you ready? Professor Morel. Professor Morel, Lucas Morel, is a professor of politics and head of the politics department at Washington Lee University. Professor Morel also teaches in the master's program in American History at Ashland University. Summer programs for the Claremont Institute for the Study of Statesmanship and Political Philosophy, and high school teacher workshops sponsored by the John M. Ashbrook Center, the Gilder Lehrman Institute, and the Liberty Fund. Woo! Professor Morel currently serves on the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission, which will plan activities to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States of America. Professor Morel, we're thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Glad to be here. Look forward to everyone's questions.
Okay, very good. And now, Mr. Val Crofts. Mr. Val Crofts is a social studies teacher from Janesville, Wisconsin. Val received the Outstanding Teacher of American History Award from the Wisconsin Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. That's wonderful. He teaches at Milton High School in Milton, Wisconsin, and has been there 16 years. He teaches AP U.S. Government and Politics, U.S. History, and U.S. Military History. That's cool. My father was a West Pointer. Val has, I found one of his textbooks. It was so cool the other day. I'm going to go study all the little things he underlined. He teaches, I already read that. Okay, Val has also taught for the Wisconsin Virtual School for 7 years. So you can do this whole Zoom thing. He's been teaching a virtual school, teaching several social studies courses for them. Val's also a member of the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission, celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and is honored to participate in Constituting America's 90-day studies. He's written quite a few for us. So welcome, Val, Mr. Val Crofts.
Oh, thank you. Great to be here, and I look forward to talking with you. Thanks again for having me.
We're so lucky that we have the both of you with us today, and that we have two exceptional guests. So where do we begin? Would y'all like to sort of fill us in on this Federalist Paper 39 a little bit, and then just give us a little opening statement?
Sure. Yeah, I can start. Fed 39 was, in a really smaller sense here, it was started off defining Madison's definition of what Republican meant, which didn't always carry a positive meaning at that time, but he wanted to make sure that that was in the document. And then he went on to discuss how the Constitution that they were hoping to ratify at that time would be a product of republicanism. Also at that time, he felt that the people should know what factors within the Constitution made it either a national government or a federal government. And he looked through three different parts of it. He looked at the character of the government, how the government was set up and how it would work, and the amendment process. And as he did that, he came to the conclusion that it wasn't necessarily one or the other, national or federal. It was a mix. And that was sort of a revelation, I think, for Madison, because at the Constitutional Convention, there were times where he would actually become sort of depressed when people would take the document and say that they felt that it would be more federal than national. He felt, as sort of the father of the Constitution, the one who designed it, that it wasn't as tidy that way. And he really had to compromise here, I think, to get the document passed, to get the document ratified, and in his essay made sure that people understood that it was a mix of both, sort of reaching out to both sides.
That's great. Let me just add that I think it's good for us to remember that these essays, even though they look authoritative today, and I believe that they are, at the time they were simply editorials, op-eds, as we like to say, in the newspaper. And so they were simply some anonymous person, because as you know, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay did not include their actual names. They wanted people to judge the arguments for their own merits, not, oh, I love it because it's Madison or Hamilton, or I hate it because it's Hamilton or Madison or Jay. They wanted to remove every reason for people to make what we like to call ad hominem arguments, attacks on the man. They really wanted to appeal to the public's mind. Just pay attention to the words, the arguments. And so they left their names off it. And so any authority that the Federalist Papers have today, I think in great measure has to do with the success of the persuasiveness of the arguments. The fact that the Constitution, proposed Constitution of 1787 actually was eventually ratified. It didn't magically make the Federalists the authority on the Constitution, but to the extent that it has become that, we'd have to say in great measure it was because not so much that the authors were famous, but because their arguments were persuasive. And they were not the only ones who were arguing in favor of the Constitution, but it is the one that comes to us today as the most coherent, comprehensive, and authoritative in terms of its argument. Another thing to remember here is Federalist was originally, these essays were published in newspapers up until essay 36. In March, those collected essays were published as a volume, and volume 2 was published in May, and Federalist 39 was part of that volume. You could essentially divide the 2 volumes of the Federalist published in book form into volume 1, which roughly dealt with union, why the states had to stick together. And it's more detailed than that, but just roughly union. The second part was about republicanism, our topic for today. So if you will, the first volume was about what the nation had to do to succeed. And the second volume was what the nation could choose to do, not simply out of necessity, but because of choice. In other words, that this Constitution wasn't just any Constitution, it really was the best one for them for a number of reasons, which Publius, or the collective authors, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, decided to lay out these arguments and explain why it is a good Constitution, why the form of Republican government that it established is a good government. People today, I'll make this my last point, people today like to throw around the phrase self-determination, and the founders didn't use that phrase. They thought of self-government. In other words, it wasn't simply, do the people have a choice in the matter? It's, does this Constitution enable the people to make good choices? And so self-government for them was the equivalent of good government. Again, it wasn't simply a government that was the product of consent. It was a consent, if you will, that was constituted or channeled in the direction of a government that would actually promote their prosperity, not simply reflect their transient will, if you will. So I'll leave it at that.
What I would do is, Tova and Cathy and I will be asking the questions today, and what we'll do is we usually do a question and a follow-up, but we'll ask each of you a question. So I think I will, Professor Morel, I'll ask you first. You know, it's interesting you say about the anonymity. Did they know kind of who was writing it, or did they really not know? And at what point exactly was it revealed? Because that is, I wonder if with the division we have today, if people would listen more to just the reasonable aspects of situations, if their name were not attached. And then I think, well, no one would click on it in social media because it wouldn't be interesting. But then again, the word anonymous always is interesting to people. When exactly was it? Yeah, that goes to, you know.
That's a great question. I don't know exactly when the names were revealed. George Washington was among the few who knew who the actual authors were. But it was deliberate, and of course who Publius was, a learned reader would understand that this was someone from ancient Roman times who was a defender of republics and a fighter against monarchies. So they chose the name deliberately. But the anonymity was deliberate, and it was, as I say, done to facilitate actual discussion of their arguments and not to immediately divide people into pro and anti proposed Constitution ratifiers. I don't know.
Really
Val, do you know when their names became public?
I don't know that either. I just really similar. I knew that their associates and people close to them knew, inner circle type people, but yeah, I'm not sure when that came out either.
Really smart though, really smart, because then people focus on the issue at hand and at different varying aspects. Because right now, today, everyone goes, oh, this is a conservative, this is a liberal, this is a conservative point. And then everybody shuts it down. So the anonymity is really intriguing to me today. Okay, Mr. Crofts, there's the difference between, oh, yes, Ms. Williams?
I looked it up for you. It looks like in 1802, George Hopkins announced that he was going to be publishing a second edition of the Federalist, and when he announced that is when he revealed who the authors were, so in 1802.
Nice.
There we go. So that was, you could do the quick math. That was a couple of decades later. Wow, really? 2 decades, 1787. Tova, do the math. Okay, 1780. Anyway, 97. Yeah, it was a couple decades. That's interesting that no one knew for that long. Thank you, Miss Williams. Okay, so Mr. Crofts, I think that this whole aspect of republicanism versus democracy, but also federalism versus national government, I really want to get into federal national. But first, I'm going to ask about the democracy versus the republicanism. And, you know, they say here, Publius had argued in Federalist 9 that, quote, petty republics of Greece and Italy, leaving one, quote, feeling sensations of horror and disgust because, quote, they were perpetually vibrating between extremes of tyranny and anarchy. So that's why they were afraid of democracy, because it goes back and forth between tyranny and anarchy, which is how's that working today?
How is that working today? Well, you know, I think when Federalist 9 was written, and they talked about how republics had been unsuccessful, I think in that they mentioned that they had evolved and they had gotten better. And I think that was Hamilton in Federalist 9, I believe, who said that, and that they would work. And so Madison takes this and he calls this the conformity of the plan to Republican principles. He's trying to show the American people who are reading this how this is going to work, and it has evolved and it should work now. And this will be a government where the people are in charge, where their representatives will be virtuous and good men, we hope, and women, and they will run the country for them. Boy, how is it going today? That's a good question. I think, boy, I've been accused by my students who know what Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is. I've always been sort of a Jimmy Stewart type person, optimist, in that I still feel most people go into government for good reasons. I still feel that you know, we have, I really hope for the most part, virtuous, effective leaders who want to get things done. I feel we have maybe strayed a little bit more extreme on the sides. It may prevent people from, like you said, you know, you hear somebody's view and you instantly don't pay attention to it. I think that we are straying a little bit from the best version of it, but I hope we could fix that at some point. Lucas, what do you think? How are we going to fix it? There you go.
Well, I have to say that the founders, at least the framers, shall we say, of the Constitution, would immediately recognize that our Constitution has been democratized over time. And I don't simply mean by that now males and females can vote. I don't mean simply that the voting age has now been reduced to 18 from 21 or whatever it was earlier. By that, I mean that the federal components of it, components that actually allowed states to have a greater hand in the formation of national policy, in particular in the US Senate. The Senate has become, you know, a voting at large rather than appointed by state legislatures. And to that extent, the framers would have thought that we have moved in an improper direction precisely because it undermines one of the things they were trying to do, which was to guarantee that the states would continue to have a role in the formation of national policy. It wouldn't simply be a reflection, if you will, of a national plebiscite, a mere majority vote. Much of the discussion today, for example, that centers on the Electoral College, whether we should have this bizarre thing that nobody else uses, and in fact operates in a way that the framers didn't intend it to operate, even though it's still constitutional. Much of that discussion focuses on the fact that it is not simply a majoritarian mechanism. And few people stop to ask, what's wrong with majorities? I thought that's the fairest, most consensual government by consent way of doing things. Isn't that the most efficient and accountable way of making sure government does your bidding? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the founders didn't believe that government simply should do the people's bidding. The hope was you could set it up through mechanisms, That wasn't the only way, it wasn't the sufficient way, but it certainly was a necessary way to get good government. How do you produce government that actually benefits people? And the founders said, our reading of history shows that when you just let people decide things by a majority, the minority, their rights don't get protected. And this is why you have constitutions. This is why you have separation of powers. This is why you have the whole panoply of things that Publius talks about in the Federalist that, yes, deliberately makes it harder, as my great mentor Bill Allen once said, it makes it harder for the American people through their government to get to yes. But you make it hard to get to yes, so it's difficult for them to get to tyranny. So it's difficult for majority factions to manifest themselves and simply use the levers of power in the interest of a majority at the expense of the minority. In short, the trick of designing a prudent constitution is to promote justice, which is to promote the common good, so that when majorities get to yes in the House and the Senate, they actually produce good for everybody, not just a self-interested majority. You could say one of the major differences between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists was, what did they believe was the most dangerous faction? Was it a faction that was a minority or a faction that was a majority? And the Anti-Federalists thought the greatest danger was minority faction, when a few people wield the levers of power at the expense of the many, and they wanted to prevent that. That's why they were in favor of small republics and the whole arguments that we could get into. Madison in particular, but the Federalists generally thought, you know what? A great danger for us now in the 1780s, and we've seen it at the state level, is when majorities act like factions. When the people get to influence power in a way where they are not promoting the common good, but simply promoting the majority's self-interest, again, at the expense of the minority. And therefore, Publius's task was to remind the public, yes, minority factions are a problem. We think we have that covered in this Constitution, but look at the bonus we get. And it is a huge bonus. It also prevents, wait for it, yes, you, the people, from using power in a way that's tyrannical. Yes, believe it or not, majorities can be bad. And if you want proof of that, turn on Twitter, turn on the news, turn on the nonviolent protests that in certain places have become, if not violent, tyrannical mobs. Ask the mayor of Minneapolis, who is not a conservative man by any stretch of the imagination. Look at what happened to him when he verbally disagreed with the spokeswoman who asked him a yes or no question. Do you believe in defunding the police? And again, I'm not raising this to tell you I'm for it, I'm against it. I just wanted you to see what happened to that mayor in the middle of a vast throng of people. When he was asked that yes or no question, he courageously said, I am not in favor of abolishing the police. And the woman yelled at him, get the fill in the blank out of here. And he was fortunate, in my opinion, to be able to walk through that crowd that became increasingly hostile and intimidating. And at least on my view of the video, near the end, somebody threw something at him. All it would have taken is one or two people to start shoving him and pushing him, and things would have ended up very badly. Sorry for me to dilate on this, but I want to show you an example of where direct democracy, you want direct democracy? That's as direct as it got, and it was scary. The founders understood that, not in theory, but in reading their history, and said, how do we prevent both the tyranny of minority and the tyranny of majority rule? We do it through a well-constructed constitution. It has to be Republican. And then, of course, in their minds, it needed this mix of federal and national.
Wow, that was amazingly said, because that's why we need a Republican form of government and not mass mass democracy making decisions, because you get someone to go in and sort of bring the reason back to the situation and to deliberate.
Yes,
you
to
know,
deliberate.
and to have a reasonable thought process with the representatives that represent minorities, the minority and the majority. Really, really beautifully, both of you beautifully said.
Okay.
Okay.
Called in Federalist 10 to refine and enlarge the public views, not to replace it, but to refine and enlarge it.
Refine and enlarge it. I'm writing that down. That's really good. Okay, Tova, your turn, Tova.
Sure. So this is so fascinating. And as a student, I know firsthand that this isn't really something that is taught a lot in schools. Like, I consider myself generally well educated on civics and everything. I took AP United States history, which I know at least some people on this call have certain experience teaching. And even I didn't know, it's not emphasized that this is a republic. I always just assumed it was a democracy. And until I joined Constituting America, I didn't know. And also my question reflects some question we got in the chat by Gary Porter, who also asked this, like, why isn't this something that's emphasized in schools? Is this just an oversight, or is it pushing a certain narrative? Like, why aren't we taught as students that this is a republic and not a democracy? And then how do you think that teachers can better reflect that in the curriculum? And why do you think it's important that we know that this is a republic? Because how does us knowing that our country isn't a pure democracy, it's a republic, how does this knowledge influence the way that we should interact with our government and our responsibilities as citizens? So if anyone wants to take on that multifaceted question, you can go ahead.
Val, you want to kick that one off, or shall I?
Oh, yeah, you can. I'll respond after. Go ahead.
Okay. We'll have Val correcting my mistakes. Very good.
No, that's not true.
It's a fascinating question. I'm trying to think back, and I'm 56 years old, so I'm really, really old in your eyes, Tova. And actually, I wake up and I feel really, really old too. Anyway, I'm trying to recall my own education as an elementary, middle school, and high school student in I don't recall a discussion of factions. I don't recall a discussion of democracy versus republic. But I will say that I think over time, the word democracy, its reputation was rehabilitated. And that is news to people today. They think, obviously, we're a democracy. Obviously, it's, small d, it's good to be a Democrat. And that's rule of the people. That's popular sovereignty. What's wrong with that? And republic sounds archaic or old-fashioned or antiquarian. I think what happened is that over time, rule by the people became the general way of understanding a government that was accountable to the people. And the word democracy got a good reputation over time, as what I'd say was rehabilitated, as it were. And it simply became the more popular way of describing us. It sounds, it sounds less technical than res publica, the people's things or the popular things. And so I think in textbooks, to the extent that history is taught or civics or American government is taught, it's just the general way that government by the people is referred. And so, republic as a word just lost favor over time when the simple concept of people's accountability over their government, when that became the prevailing and generally speaking, proper way of understanding their connection to government, when that took hold, it was just easier to talk about democracy that way. It might have helped as well that the first major and today the most longstanding political party in the United States are known as Democrats. At the time, they were national, or they were Democratic Republicans, and the word Democrat held on. But I think just over time, it was a way of people emphasizing the fact that they're the ones who are truly sovereign. They're the ones who truly are the authority or the ground of political authority in their communities. Short answer to how should we get back to talking and thinking of ourselves as republics, I would say you can't start too early in terms of sharing the difference and just have a discussion. Don't tell people we must call ourselves Republicans with a small r. No, make it a debate. This country was formed out of a debate. It moves out of debate. Again, Look at Twitter, look at Facebook, look at the news today. On a good day, we're actually having discussions and debates and arguments about how we should move forward. So just turn it into a debate. Ask your students, if you're a high school teacher or middle school teacher, are we a republic or are we a democracy? And a brave kid will probably say, what's a republic? And so you can invite those definitions and talk about the pros and cons of direct accountability, direct rule, New England town hall form of government, and contrast it with indirect. Why would the people willingly not make the decisions for themselves? Why would they give it to a subset of people, as Madison describes in Federalist 10? And that would be the invitation for students to have a genuine inquiry into the matter. And then have a short assignment. Give me a paragraph tomorrow, what the pros are of democracy and what the pros are of republic, and then flip it the next day. What's the downside of Republican forms of government, if there are any? What are the downsides of democracy?
All right, Tova, you're going to let me know if I answer all these questions in the order you said, if I miss anything here. I think as Lucas said too, the wording, right? Now we look at a democratic, Republican, the words have different meanings now than they did at the time. Democracy, I think, is a much more maybe societal friendly word. Everybody has a voice. Everybody gets to participate. We like that. We want a democracy. We have a representative democracy. We have a direct democracy. They're both parts, but within that, we create a republic, which my students, you mentioned, I think, Janine, earlier about the pledge. We look at the pledge. I was in a school that we still did the pledge every day. So we'd look at it in AP Gov, and I would say on one of the first few days, okay, what's it mean? What do these mean? Do you notice anything? And we'd talk about that. What is a republic? And as Lucas said, why do we have that? Where'd it come from? And then as we evolved and studied the Federalist Papers, it's really interesting. And I don't know if you mentioned this, Tova, but my class, we didn't study Fed 39 too much. We looked at a few others. We talked about what it meant to be a republic in 1780s during the ratification. And so they had an idea what it meant, and we looked at what's good, what's bad, how would our society function with direct democracy, representative democracy today. So I think it could be the wording, the understanding of it just isn't there. And how do we get back to that? Just educate, civil discussions about what it means. What do you think? Not, are you right? Are you wrong about it? How does it work? How would it work better? And did I miss any questions that you had? I feel like I might have. What else did you say?
Oh, just how does this why is it so important that we have this understanding that we're a republic, not a democracy, and or not a pure democracy, and how can that influence the way that we as informed citizens interact with our government and, effectively make our voices heard?
Sure. I think it allows us to understand how a representative form of government works. It allows us to use them as our voices in Washington to do that for us. I think we have to assume if the system works, for example, in where I'm in Wisconsin, I write, email, talk to my congressman. He then will take concerns with him. We hope that's how it's supposed to work. You take other things, special interests, et cetera, out of it. But I think that idea of taking your ideas to our government, have them be represented for us, teaches people that's how the system is supposed to work in theory, and that helps them.
Okay, Cathy.
Well, thank y'all. This has been fascinating. And I know as a political science major, I never read the Federalist Papers until Janine called me up one day and said she wanted to start Constituting America. And she said, and one of the first things I want us to do is read the Federalist Papers. And so we read all 85 that year. And Janine and I actually each did an essay on all 85 of the Federalist Papers along with our scholars. And I just love this. But I wanted to ask, and I think Professor Morel, you pointed this out when we were talking about this earlier, that Madison spends maybe about a third of the paper or so talking about the fact that we are a republic, but then he switches and spends quite a bit of time on this whole issue of federal versus national or national versus federal. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and also define what Madison means by national versus federal for some of the students that are on.
Sure. And that sounds like a mundane question, but it's actually an extremely important one, because today when we say the federal government, what immediately happens in your head? National. You don't think federal in the way that the debate between the anti-federalists and the federalists looked at those terms. So this one is a real, I mean, this one's even in a way more urgent, if not more urgent, more in need than the republic versus democracy question, because today we think federal, we think it's a synonym for national. And it is these days, because so much of the government today, again, contrary to the founders' intention, even the Federalist intention, so much of the government today is done at the national level. At the time, federal was ingrained in your students Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. That is a federal constitution. It is a league or an alliance. And in fact, Hamilton has a spectacular paragraph in Federalist 15 where he shows the difference between a league, alliance, or a strict confederation or federal system of government and what he calls a real government, what we would call a national government. And the biggest difference is this. Under the Articles of Confederation, the national legislature, if you will, the Articles of Confederation Congress, they did not have power to pass laws. They did not have power to pass laws. All they could do is pass resolutions, words on paper sent to the governors and state legislatures that said, we would like you to do the following. Please make your citizens do this. Or we would like this amount of money, otherwise known as taxes. But they could not impose it. If you will, to use a dangerous word, interposition, the state governments interposed themselves. They stepped in between the Congress of the nation and the citizens. On the other hand, the states were the intermediaries. And so nothing could be done or imposed on citizens without the state's permission. So it's kind of like the United Nations. If the United Nations wanted me as an individual to do something, they couldn't order me to do it. They would have to tell the United States, and our ambassador would convey that message. Hey, the Security Council just did this. We want Americans to do the following. It doesn't immediately take effect. So federal meant a government over state governments. National meant, whoa, an actual law passed that imposes, and if you will, it goes around the state governments and directly acts on individual citizens. And you'll see as Madison patiently makes his way through, is it federal? Is it national? Is it federal? Is it national? He shows the things that either act on or are expressions of state governments. That's federal. But when the proposed Constitution acts in a way directly on individual citizens or reflects their will, that's national. And the great fear, and it's a laudable one, the great fear of the anti-federalists was, whether today, tomorrow, a week from now, or a year from now, we know it's inevitable that this so-called federal government that Publius is bragging about, it will eventually become, here's the C word, not the F word, but the C word. It will be a consolidation of states. In other words, the states will have become one big mosh pit, and all the government will be done at the so-called federal national level, because what few limited powers they look like they have will become way more over time, and we're afraid of that. We don't think we can control it. Yikes. So their pejorative description of the proposed Constitution of 1787 was, oh, it's just a consolidation of states. In other words, state governments will have nothing to do if we put this stronger federal government into power. For example, taxes. Federal government gets to tax in their areas. State governments still get to tax in their areas. The anti-federalists said, no way. We know that once they start taxing, they're going to take the whole enchilada and will squeeze out government at the local and state level. That's our fear. So government over states, that's federal. Government over individual citizens, that's national. And by the way, and here's a bonus for today, if you ever have a conversation about causes of the Civil War, stop and ask the person who is defending the old way, the lost cause, defending the states' rights notion of the Civil War, ask them one question. Do you believe at the time that they thought the United States Constitution was a real government, a national government, or did they thought it was a confederacy, which was the word they used before the Civil War? Was it a government over states? And I guarantee you that they will say accurately, if they know their history, oh, the secessionists and the Confederates believed that the Constitution was not a national government. It was a confederacy. It was what the word they will use is, or the phrase they will use is, it is a compact of states. It is an agreement among the states that the national government should only do certain things. And it's because the national government has abused its authority in the interest of northern states that we believe we need to leave. They believe that the national government was more like the Articles. They believe it was a confederacy of states, a compact, an agreement of states. And when the compact was violated, they said, we're just going to take our marbles and go home. Okay? So there's your bonus answer for the day. Threw that in for free.
I'm taking notes here. Look at all my notes. I'm going to go to you, Mr. Crofts, to answer that question. But to recap, governments over the states is federal. Government over the people is national.
Correct.
Right.
Should have had you answer that question. You're much briefer.
No, it was eloquent. I just want to make sure I assess it. And let's have Mr. Crofts answer, and then I want to go back and have you give us maybe an example of contemporary politics where government is ruling over the people as opposed to the state. Okay, and the whole 17th Amendment thing too. Mr. Crofts.
Yeah.
To answer Kathy's question, do you want that?
Yeah, no, Lucas did a good job in explaining federal versus national. What I just was going to point out is throughout the rest of the document, Madison goes through and he goes through the different parts of the government, the House, the Senate, the courts, the president, and he gives, again, he kind of compromises here. And he said that, it's a source of power. He looked at that and he said, well, that's a little bit of both. Operation of the powers he felt was national. Extent of powers that it would have could be federal. And then he went to the amendment process and he said, well, it's a little bit of both. So his answer to that was he switched from mostly national to both. And he felt those powers existed within all forms of the government. So.
Kathy, you may have another question. I just also, I love assessing what you're saying and Jill in my mind. Federal is when there's the Congress and the citizen and the states is in between. Is that what you were saying too, Professor Morel?
Yes, a strictly federal system. Think of an alliance or a league of states. Think of NATO, think of the United Nations, think of the EU, the European Union. Those are all federations. Those are all federal systems of governments. They act on nation states. They do not act directly on individuals.
The
but I like that. I like that vision of federalism is when you have the states in between the Congress and the citizen, in between the Congress and the citizen.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Crofts.
Oh no, I was just going to say the states have sovereign powers as well. That's how I kind of look at it. So, yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Kathy, do you have another question before we move on?
Well, I was just going to say, again, that's something I didn't know. And thank you so much for explaining that. And I'd go back to you or Tova. So.
Okay. Well, you know, I think the interesting, okay, I have two questions. One is to give an example of how the government, I think Mr. Crofts was talking too about Madison thought some things were national and some aspects were federal, but it'd be really interesting to have an example that where people can relate in modern day where the government is behaving in a federal way, you know, and where is the government in a modern day situation behaving in a national way. Who wants to answer that question?
Val, you're up.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, Lucas, just be ready with a safety net.
Amendments.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, the idea of federal, national. Yeah, I look at the amendment process, how that is set up. I look at it as a mix with it. As far as government goes today, that's a big question. People will, I'm sure this happens to Lucas too. Anything happens, they come and they say, okay, is the president doing this right? Is Congress doing this? Is this the state? With, for example, wellness has come up a lot lately. Does the president have the right to declare certain policies for the wellness of the United States? And in some areas, he does. And in other areas, states can take the lead in that, and states can, as far as rules on their own wellness and medical rules within it, can as well. So I think the executive, yeah, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. It was just...
No, you're good. I was just going to say, my strongest thing I remember recently would be talking about, the president does have the right, I feel, in a national emergency, state of wellness, to step in, with the state still retaining their powers as well. What do you think, Lucas?
Yeah, I agree. A great example of this, and it's the one that's most poignant today, isn't it? The police. We don't have a national police, and I personally think that's a good thing. In the former Soviet Union or the USSR, when, for example, they occupied East Berlin, it wasn't East Germans that were guarding that wall, it were Russians. They brought in a people who did not know the neighborhood, who did not know the community, whose hearts would not be plucked and twinge at all if they had to shoot people who were trying to leave that city, okay? They were an occupying force, okay? So today, what the calls for defunding the police, that is not a federal issue. That is not a national issue because the police are state and local, as they should be. I would be afraid of being in a city that was policed by people who did not know me or my neighbors. They would be less reticent of abusing their authority if they lived somewhere else, were paid by somebody else. Remember, quartering of troops was one of the major complaints in the Declaration of Independence. We felt as a people, as colonists, that we were occupied by a foreign power, precisely because these people were forced to be billeted and occupied our private residences without our permission. They ordered pizza without paying for it and all of that sort of stuff, right? So today, when you think of police, that was supposed to be a joke. Anyway, Janine is the only one who got it. It was so bad, you guys are being polite. Fair enough. Think of, if you look at any textbook that speaks of state and local government, one of the first definitions you will get is of the police power. But the police power isn't simply to protect and serve those guys. My middle sister is a retired police officer, okay? The police powers are defined as follows: to promote the safety, health, welfare, and morals of a community. Guess which form of government doesn't have that authority? State or Congress? Congress, right? Article 1, Section 8 has 18 clauses. 17 of them are enumerated. They have the power to tax, they have the power to coin money, etc. And then, of course, that wonderful necessary and proper clause, number 18. But they are limited to those areas, what Madison in this Federalist 39 calls the extent of the powers. What can it touch? What can it touch? And what it can't touch is left, the residue, if you will, and it is a significant one. Most of the government is done at the state and local level. That's the federal system. The national government gets a few things where it has the superior authority, and everything is left for the states. Congress, in short, does not have plenary authority. They don't get to rule on anything they like. That's not the way we're set up. Most of what should be happening, at least according to the framers of the Constitution, should happen at the state and local level. Traditionally, that's known as the police powers. The police today, what's happening in Minneapolis or any other, LA, where I grew up, Los Angeles, what's happening in all these cities, this concern over abuse of authority, that should be handled by those cities, by those counties, by their states. They are more directly accountable to the people in those areas, and those police live, at least reasonably, within the jurisdictions within which they operate. So the whole discussion over, thank you, Lisa, the whole discussion over defunding the police, whether Trump should get in on that or not, whether Congress should get in on that or not, according to the founders, they should stay out. And that's not a partisan thing, I'm telling you. According to the framers of the Constitution, policing of a community is a local matter, and it's local for a reason.
So that was going to be my next question. I was going to let Tova have the last question here, but that was going to be my question. The fact that Congress now is they're trying to pass laws about police. Is that really within their wherewithal to do? And it seems like it's not. So that would be a form of national government.
Well, I'll make this quick. The short answer is Congress is going to step in where they have already funded local and state police in certain ways. Now they can restrict that funding to the ways that that money is used. And therefore they could say, well, if you still want this money, you can't do chokeholds. Or if you still want this money, you need to direct more money to social services, whatever. So the ways in which the national legislature, our Congress, has already, if you will, insinuated itself into state and local matters with the permission of these states, if they want that money. In a way, they've been bribed. Sorry, Val, I'll let you come up with a more neutral term. But in those areas where Congress has already funded state and local policing matters, that's where they have room. They can't just step in and say, we mandate that police do the following. They don't have that, at least according to the Constitution, they don't have that authority.
That's certainly not explained in the press. You know, that's certainly not explained to us anywhere. Mr. Crofts, do you have something you want to add to that?
No, I was just going to tell Lucas, I think that's called personal revenue enhancement.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, we didn't even get to the 17th Amendment. Y'all gonna have to come back. We talked about how the 17th Amendment changed federalism versus nationalism. We have 2 minutes. Tova, Cathy, who wants the final question? I guess Tova. Okay.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about this Federalist Papers modern like effects, but I was wondering if we could talk about it in the context of when it was created. So how did the form of government that they were outlining, how was that different than England's form of government that they wanted to move away from? And what problems does a republic solve that they saw in the English form of government?
Shoot, 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
All right, Lucas, we each have a minute. All right, Tova, first part again. How is it different?
From the British
how is it different than
more rule of the people is what they were looking for. They didn't want it. Some people have said, sorry, I'll talk really fast. Some people have said, you know, at that point they should have been called nationalists instead of federalists. Well, nationalist was a bad term at that point because they looked at that as strong central rule, which they were trying to get rid of, so that they didn't want to do that. And then what was your second question?
What problems does a republic form of government solve that they saw in the English form of government?
Yeah, more rule of the people, going into government. I think I kept it under a minute. Lucas, go.
Yeah, I don't know that I can improve on that much. A fundamental difference between the British system and the American system at that time is the British system did not represent in each of its branches the people at large. you had the royal family in the monarchy, you had the landed nobles in the House of Lords, and then you had the commoners, obviously, in the House of Commons. And so the way they decided to promote good government was to divide their government into, if you will, class representation, or estates is the formal way they would have spoken of it. So if you're a nobleman, you inherited nobility, you had your interest promoted by the nobles. If you were the royal family, obviously by the king or queen. And if you were a schmo like me, you were represented by the House of Commons. What we did is said, no. All of government should represent all of the people, but we don't want all of the government in the same hands. Remember, that mistake was made in the Articles, where they just had a Congress, never got around to creating a court, and didn't really have an executive per se. So what we decided in the proposed Constitution, which reflected, for the most part, what happened at the state level, was that the people should be represented in every branch. And so the branches had particular functions: legislative, judicial, and then who carries out the government, who executes the will of the people? That's the executive, or the governor, or in this case, the president. And so we thought that the way to promote good government was to have all the people represented in every branch, but make the branches separate enough, but also somewhat connected, as Publius calls it, commingled. We should have some connection between the branches, but principally distinct branches, so that it's hard to get to yes. What's the most powerful branch? At the time, we thought the legislative branch. So what Publius rhetorically did is he persuaded the American people, we did bicameralism on purpose. In other words, it's not a compromise. We think because the legislature is the most dangerous, let's make it two distinct branches, modes of appointment. Powers even are slightly different. Qualifications for the office, how long you're in the office. We're going to make these as different as possible so that each of them defends and protects their own turf, so that when it gets to yes, it's very unlikely that they will be doing something unjust.
This is so cool. That's just amazing, both of you. And I guess in summation, the more we move to a strong executive branch in the collective mind of America, the more we are going to more of a nationalistic government, right? If people vote for the president and think the president's the most important person, because the president can then dictate, doesn't have any boundaries to when he goes straight around to the
yeah,
it seems like the legislative branch is more federal, but the presidency these days has seemed to come, he directly can affect the people in a way that's more national, and that could even lead to monarchy.
I think the difference I point out to my students, I think they both act nationally, because remember, the fundamental thing that Congress does that the Articles Congress could not do is they get to pass laws. They say, states, get out of my way. Janine, you have to do this, okay? The bigger difference is that the president's authority, you don't have an Article 1, Section 8 in Article 2 with the president. Notice with the president, he's defined as having executive power, whereas Congress is defined as having legislative powers. They are plural. We can spell them out ahead of time. We can know when you're abusing or adding to your power. With the president, because his exercise of authority has to be more discretionary. Oh, Congress, you've passed this law. Oh, Supreme Court, you've issued this decision. We leave it to the president to figure out, how will we enforce it in this particular situation? That you can't spell out ahead of time. And so his power, if you look at Article 2, is spelled out more in terms of the roles he's supposed to play rather than the specific authority. There are a few things, right? Nominations, treaties, etc. But generally speaking, he has executive power, not 18 individual specific enumerated things he gets to do. He's the one who's on the job 24/7. And is supposed to be implementing what Congress does. And to that extent, it's scarier if we are looking to a particular person. I don't care what party, I don't care who's in office or out right now. It's more threatening to me as an individual if one person has authority to govern me rather than a legislature, which is numerous, it's bicameral, both have to agree, and they have to spell out what it is they are doing and apply generally over the American people. So I see it more as the nature of authority being different there. Executive power versus legislative power.
I agree with you constitutionally, right?
Yes.
That's what it's supposed to be. But so many people don't understand that anymore.
Correct.
And they don't understand the Constitution, and they don't understand why the Congress is important, and they don't understand why there has to be a slow, methodical branches. So everyone just seems to, en masse, show up for the president. And the irony of that is, it's in the long run has whether you're the majority or the minority, it's going to affect you greatly. Huh?
This is so important. This is why, notice how the terms are spelled out. If you lose, as people who favored Hillary Clinton in 2016 did, for them, what was the proper response? Most of them, all right, Trump is my president, even though I didn't vote for him. But a fairly loud minority said what? Not my president. A fairly loud minority said what? Resistance. That, in my opinion, is un-American. Not because I voted for Trump, because by the way, I did not. Just putting that on the table. It's irrelevant who's in power. What is relevant is, in this country, republics require two things: good winners and good losers. And we are steadily losing that understanding. We think it's imperative to be in the majority. If I don't win, I'm going to burn the place down, or I'm going to make things harder. And we don't realize, what if your person did win? If Hillary Clinton, by the way, Hillary Clinton was this close to becoming president of the United States, this close. And guess what the people who voted for anybody else should have done if she was elected? She is my president. I don't have to agree with her policies, but I have to obey. That's how republics work. And when republics fail to do that, what do you get? 1861 is what you get. Leave you on that positive note.
Wow. Okay. I want y'all to come back. This was so cool. This was amazing. Thank both of you so much. Let's give Mr. Crofts and Professor Morel a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Just invigorating, incredibly invigorating. Tova, this should be played in every classroom in America. That's what I think.
And thank you to our guests. I swear, I learned more in these 1 hour sessions than I do probably in months of school. So thank you for providing this service for students.
Okay, thank you both so much.